Welcome to the McKinney Vento Professional Development Training, understanding the educational rights of students experiencing homelessness and what services are available. My name is Denise Kreiss, and I will be facilitating this training. I am with Trenton Public Schools as the appointed homeless liaison. I've also invited Taylor Burnett, an outreach counselor from Anchor House, to co-facilitate this training to share her experience with the work that she does with unaccompanied youth. She will also share program information regarding Anchor House. My goal for this training is that you're able to shift your perspective on any misconceptions of homelessness. There are so many stigmas associated with the word homeless, and one can't help but imagine the unsheltered homeless populations, those that live on the streets and are begging for money on a corner or holding up signs waiting to be rescued. You will learn throughout this presentation that homelessness looks extremely different for our students and families. Many of our homeless families are working parents and often do not want to share that they are homeless due to feelings of shame or fear of losing their children. I have recorded this training with Taylor in hopes that you can revisit to review any areas you may miss through distractions that are at home, and you have the opportunity to reflect on empathy, compassion, and grace. So the first part of our training will be to view a video titled Informed and Aware.
The law states that students and families must be informed of their educational rights, and it also states that school staff be made aware of the realities of homelessness. By putting effort into your awareness and informational campaigns, you'll be reaching the people who need the services, and you'll build a team who's ready to help. A big part of a liaison's job is community outreach. LEAs must ensure that parents and guardians are informed of the educational rights and related opportunities available to them and their children. This can mean posting public notice in schools, shelters, malls, libraries, or anywhere in your community that is highly visible. Make sure to maintain an online presence too. Start with the LEA's website. The law also requires that everything is clear and easy to understand, which might include translation into languages other than English. Think about it this way: if a student or their family doesn't know about the wonderful services and support available to them, why would they tell you that they're homeless? There are conversation guides and educational rights posters in this lesson to get you started. It is not the family's job to self-identify or ask about their rights. It is the school's job to proactively find and inform them. The law requires at least 2 annual notices about rights sent to and signed by parents, but that's the bare minimum. Liaisons also help students and families exercise their rights, such as providing parents with opportunities to participate in the education of their children. Plan for regular communication about things like open houses, parent-teacher conferences, sports and teams, book fairs, etc. In fact, by communicating regularly and ensuring they know their rights, you might avoid some of the most common legal disputes. Yes, dispute resolution is part of a liaison's duties, but wouldn't it be better to prevent such problems? We'll review the specific parts of the law later in the lesson, but in general, parents and guardians and unaccompanied homeless youth must be informed of their rights in writing, and the liaison will assist them in exercising those rights and participating in their children's education. The other side of the awareness coin is educating and training adults about homelessness. Liaisons must raise awareness in their schools and communities, including teachers, aides, administrators, office and enrollment personnel, food and transportation staff, and any agencies that serve youth, as well as anyone else who works with students. Why is this part of the law? The goal is to heighten awareness about homelessness. As we've seen, identification cannot be left to a yearly enrollment form. Everyone, regardless of their job, can help keep an eye out for signs of homelessness. This is why the law mandates that LEAs educate essential staff about what to look for and who to contact if they suspect a student may be homeless. And going deeper, there is even specific language about who to train, such as principals, attendance officers, teachers, and enrollment and pupil services personnel. Another section describes raising awareness of the effects of short-term stays in a shelter and other challenges. In other words, the law requires that all educators build empathy and capacity to help. 67% of students say they were uncomfortable telling people at school about their homelessness and asking for help. It may seem daunting to educate everyone you work with about homelessness, but imagine the effect it will have once they're all knowledgeable and ready to help. Even if a student isn't comfortable asking for help, they'll be surrounded by caring, aware adults who know what to do. And you are not alone. There are many people and resources to help you. For example, let's take a look at one of the resources available later in this lesson. It's just a 3-page fact sheet from the Department of Education, but it contains specific advice you can share. While it is important to avoid jumping to conclusions about students due to their appearance or performance, there are often warning signs that a child or youth is experiencing homelessness. For example, a child may fall asleep repeatedly in class, wear the same clothes multiple days in a row, have poor hygiene, fail to complete homework, or be regularly late or absent. Instead of punishing a student for these behaviors, it would be beneficial to get to the root cause and find out what supports you may be able to provide. And the next paragraph has common sense advice about empathizing with their experiences. This is just one example of the way you can build awareness, and it wouldn't take too long to send out as an email to staff. Imagine if everyone who works in your school knew what to do. Imagine a sharp-eyed bus driver who sees the same student being picked up at different bus stops in town, and they know how to contact their liaison. Or a teacher who understands that a student struggling with homelessness may need to handwrite their essay as they don't have a home computer to use. By taking the time to educate your colleagues, you're building a safety net for these students, and for yourself. More hands make lighter work. Can you see how awareness affects a liaison's other duties?
Here's our session outline for today. We've already viewed the Informed and Aware video. We're going to go through McKinney Vento Act law and its definition and mandated requirements. Next, we'll go through student rights as it pertains to McKinney Vento law. Then we'll review the homeless liaison role, the federal mandates of responsibility, and what is McKinney Vento services, what's available to our students. And then Taylor will chime in to provide an overview of Anchor House services for unaccompanied youth. Lastly, we'll look at pandemic relief notification. What is the McKinney Vento Act? The Stewart B. McKinney Vento Homeless Act was signed into law in 1987 to ensure educational equality and equity for all homeless students in order for them to graduate from high school. The law was reauthorized in 2015 under the Every Student Succeeds Act to provide a clear guidance for program execution. The McKinney Vento Service Program is the education of homeless children and youth programs that provides homeless students with protections and services that ensures student identification, school enrollment, school attendance, and supplemental support to complete high school. McKinney Vento services are set in place to prevent students from poverty and homelessness as adults. There are around 1.3 million children and youth experiencing homelessness in the United States. And there is a huge possibility that that number will continue to increase due to the current state of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're seeing much loss of employment and other increase of medical needs that families are experiencing through this pandemic. Under McKinney Vento, the New Jersey Department of Education established additional funding for programs to help homeless students with additional instructional and supplemental support. Some examples of these supports are tutoring, counseling, transportation, and the purchase of uniforms. Other revisions under the Every Student Succeed Acts includes the identification of homeless children and youth. So now preschool-aged homeless children are considered McKinney Vento that are enrolled in early childhood and Head Start programs. Also, homeless liaisons must collaborate and coordinate services with other service agency providers such as social service agencies, law enforcement agencies, juvenile and family courts, agencies that work with mental health services, domestic violence agencies, child care providers, runaway and homeless youth centers, providers of services and programs funded under the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and providers of emergency, transitional, and permanent housing. These public housing agencies operate under shelter and transitional housing facilities. And other revisements under the Every Student Succeed Act includes removing enrollment barriers. The rules of the law provide children and youth experiencing homelessness with the following: the right for immediate enrollment even when records are not present, The right to remain in the school of origin if it is in the best interest of the student, transportation to the school of origin, and support for academic success. Now, we're going to review what is the definition of homelessness. So that is children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth that are living in a temporary situation out of necessity. So families that are sharing a home with family or friends due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason. Families that are living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or campgrounds due to the lack of alternate adequate accommodations. Living in emergency or transitional shelters or abandoned hospitals. These are all under the definition of homelessness. Also, living in a public or private place not designated for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodation for humans. So that's pretty much like abandoned buildings, if they're living in their car, parks, bus trains, and other similar settings. Migratory children living in the above circumstances are also considered homelessness. So if a family is living in substandard housing conditions, what does that mean exactly? So pest infestation, water's not running in the home, excessive lead exposure, and then the city of Trenton goes in and lets the family know that they can no longer live in that housing unit, or high levels of mold. These are all examples of families that are considered homeless under McKinney Vento. So other examples are, not having adequate heat, not having plumbing, or building structures that are not safe. So if you receive a call from a family and their staircase collapsed or their ceiling collapsed, and I have received these calls before, those are all examples of homelessness under McKinney Vento. Another thing that I did not want to miss is any families that are displaced from a fire or natural disaster. Those families are considered homeless under McKinney Vento. Now, I wanted to provide all of you with a flow chart of how I make the determination of how a family is deemed homeless through McKinney Vento. So you see there are buckets. So we have our nighttime residents. We have doubled up hotels, and doubled up is when families are living with a family or friend due to the economic or hardship or loss of housing. So in order for families to be deemed homeless, they must not meet the requirements of one of these three areas. So if they have, they don't have a permanent nighttime residence, if they don't have a adequate housing unit, and if it's not fixed, so if it's not somewhere that they can stay every night, if they are missing one of those three categories, then those families are considered homeless. Unaccompanied youth. Now, the term unaccompanied youth includes homeless, child or youth that is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, and they meet all of the other requirements of homelessness under McKinney Vento. So youth that don't have, again, adequate, regular, or fixed nighttime residence. So when you take a closer look at the definition of unaccompanied youth, there are two conditions that must be present for a child or youth to be considered unaccompanied under the McKinney Vento Act. The child or youth living arrangements meets the Act's definitions as I previously stated, and the child or youth is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. Now, this is a flow chart of how to deem a student as an unaccompanied youth. So what you see here is if a parent is incarcerated and a relative or friend agrees to care for their child. You see the arrows pointing to the right, and that is the example of not being considered homeless. And then you see the arrow pointing to the left, and that would be the category where the youth would be considered homeless. So let's read through the example of the definition of an unaccompanied youth that would be homeless in the situation of a parent that's incarcerated. So the family was homeless prior to the parent's incarceration, or the caregiver arrangement is not fixed, regular, and adequate. So the parent must meet the definition of the homelessness, and then once they're incarcerated, now that youth would still be considered McKinney Vento. So the example of not is the student did not change residences, caregiver moved in, parent made arrangements for the student prior to the incarceration. So if the parents, signed over their parental rights to a sister or a cousin or grandmother, then that child would not qualify for McKinney Vento services. Now, who is eligible? Now, preschool age children, age 3 and 4, that are in early childhood programs are considered McKinney Vento. Kindergarten through 12th grade, charter school students, and students that are temporarily displaced in other districts that were originally deemed homeless from Trenton. Now we're going to briefly watch a enrollment video, and this will really provide a clear view of how families are deemed McKinney Vento and what that is.
The topics of identification, eligibility, school selection, and enrollment are tangled up together. Sometimes identification, school selection, and enrollment happen at the same moment on the same form. Sometimes eligibility and school selection are simple issues, sometimes not. They don't always happen in the same order either. This lesson examines the laws dealing with school selection and best interest, as well as immediate enrollment. Consider this scenario. A family in your LEA loses their home and moves to a nearby shelter temporarily. The 9-year-old daughter is identified by her teacher, who overhears her talking about moving to a shelter and tells you about it. You confirm her eligibility and begin the process to get her services and referrals as needed. In this case, school selection and enrollment are non-issues because the student is not moving schools. Now consider this scenario. A 15-year-old arrives to your LEA after being kicked out of his house and having to move in with a friend. This adds the status of unaccompanied homeless youth because he's not in the physical custody of his parents. The youth is requesting enrollment in the same school that their friend attends. Identification and eligibility are easily handled, but now school selection and enrollment must be considered. What is the best choice for this student? Before we make a decision, let's look at the laws surrounding school selection and best interest. First, schools may not segregate students based on their homeless status. No separate classrooms or alternative schools, and no mandatory transfers if they become homeless during the year. While this may seem obvious to most educators, it never hurts to explain that stability and inclusion is in everyone's best interest. The law also mentions school of origin. This is where the student was enrolled or is currently enrolled, and it's assumed that this is where they should stay if possible, because school stability is a main priority. In fact, the non-regulatory guidance has this to say about switching schools. The McKinney Vento Act strongly emphasizes the importance of school stability for homeless children and youth. Changing schools multiple times significantly impedes a student's academic and social growth. The research on highly mobile students, including homeless students, indicates that a student can lose academic progress with each school change. Highly mobile students have been found to have lower test scores and worse overall academic performance than peers who do not change schools frequently. Therefore, the McKinney Vento Act calls for LEAs to maintain students in their school of origin to promote school stability and greater educational outcomes overall, unless it is not in the student's best interest. Sometimes a parent or a guardian may request a transfer to a new school. This can happen for many reasons, such as if the family has relocated to a shelter or a residence that is very far away from the school of origin. At this point, the liaison steps in to make the final decision. You must give priority to the parent's request. but also consider student-centered factors according to the law. This means, in addition to the parent's request, you must also evaluate the impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, and safety for the student. The choice regarding placement shall be made regardless of whether the child or youth lives with a homeless parent or has been temporarily placed elsewhere. Once you make a decision, you'll inform the family in writing and help them dispute your decision if they choose to. These topics are covered elsewhere in the course. And as a reminder, unaccompanied homeless youth are treated as independent in these cases, so you'll assist them directly. They are allowed to request enrollment in a new school without parental guidance, and they'll need to be informed of your decision in writing as well. Looking back at our second scenario, what does your gut say? It's likely in his best interest to stay enrolled in his school of origin, according to the law. At this point, since he is not enrolled in your LEA, you will immediately contact the liaison at his local district. That liaison will help the student understand your decision and also arrange for daily transportation from his friend's house to his school of origin. Are there ever cases where a student should change schools? Of course, all the time. Each situation is different and will require your careful consideration. After all of that, you'll be pleased to learn that enrollment is a relatively simple issue. Immediate enrollment is required in all cases. The law does not specify a timeline, but hopefully the student will be enrolled within 2 to 3 days of identification. If there's a dispute over school selection, the student is immediately enrolled in the school the parents or guardian are requesting, and then if needed, the student can be switched back after the dispute is resolved. The law is clear that enrollment must happen first. No missed deadlines or imposed fees, no waiting for records from the school of origin, or delaying until a dispute is resolved. Why is urgency legally mandated? Because the longer a student is out of school or goes without needed support and services, the more difficult it is for them to succeed. After enrollment, if you learn of a reason the student should not be allowed to attend, you can reverse the decision. One more note on enrollment and records. Information collected about living situations is not to be included in the student directory or made publicly available. It is considered private educational data, and it belongs in the student record. This may be overwhelming to think about, but remember that you are not alone. You are the authority in this situation, but you have a team to rely on for advice and support. In fact, your LEA and state office is legally required to help you make these decisions and provide solutions that you deem necessary.
So going back to student rights, which was mentioned in the enrollment video, students that are considered homeless must be immediately enrolled, even if they don't have a birth certificate, school records or transcripts, immunization or other health reports, and they do not have to show proof of residency. And I have linked the New Jersey Department of Education's memo that pretty much provides a clear, definition of McKinney Vento and why these students do not have to provide proof of residency. I will share this PowerPoint presentation with you so then you can access this link. Enrollment, I just want to go back to that. Now, enrollment is defined as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. So that's key. It's not just about the classes, but that they are able to be involved in after-school programs such as sports. Now, more on student rights. Homeless children and youth have the right to attend the school of origin for the duration of homelessness. So if a family is in a hotel in boarding town, they have a right to continue their child's education in Trenton Public Schools, and we would provide transportation. In any case in which a family becomes homeless between academic years or during an academic year, again, if that same family, was displaced in boarding town mid-year, they can continue to go to school in Trenton Public Schools. For the remainder of the academic year, if the child or youth becomes permanently housed during the academic year. Now that's critical because we don't want to have a break in their educational stability. So although they found permanent housing, so let's go back to that example of the family that's in boarding town. Now they're back in Trenton, they found housing. They could, and let's say they're on the south side of Trenton and their homeschool was on the west side, that child has a right to continue going to school in that same school that they were in during displacement. Now, for the upcoming school year, they would have to transfer to their home school where they're permanently housed. Students do not need to register in the district in which they are temporarily residing if not attending school in that district. There have been many examples where, times where students are asked to transfer to the temporary residing school district because the school is not knowledgeable in the McKinney Vento law. So it's important that we all know that if a student is in another city and they are considered McKinney Vento, they do not need to transfer. Notification to school district which the student is temporarily residing is critical as it's document timelines for being domiciled. Now, let's use that same example, that family that's in boarding town temporarily. Being that I'm the homeless liaison, I would have to contact the homeless liaison in boarding town to inform them that they have a homeless family in boarding town, although we're financially responsible for that student, although that student is going to continue schooling in Trenton Public School, we still have to notify our other homeless liaisons when our families are temporarily residing in other cities. Homeless liaison role. Now, the local liaison is responsible for ensuring that the school personnel identify homeless children and youth throughout outreach and coordination with other entities and agencies, such as Homefront and Women's Space. I work very closely with these agencies, and we have a very strong working relationship where when they have families that have been identified to be serviced through their programs, I have a electronic referral form that they will complete, or the parent will complete, and then I will begin to provide additional support and services to those families. Also, within the role of the homeless liaison is ensuring that homeless students and families receive educational services, including Head Start and other preschool programs. Other referrals, such as healthcare, mental health, dental services, and appropriate services are things that, as a homeless liaison, we should be doing to support families that need that additional assistance. I use a program called NowPal, and it's an amazing system that provides an electronic view of community services that are available. And I'm able to actually customize services according to how they fill out my intake form, and then create a customizable profile So this is the NowPal site. So as I mentioned, this program provides a list of over 350 organizations that are participating. And what's cool about this system is that you're able to provide customization. So if I wanted to work with Miss Perez, I can actually create a profile for her and then enter all of her information. What's nice is you don't have to do everything. It looks like overwhelming. All you have to do is provide the basic information, first name, last name, date of birth, and then you can get started. I prefer to enter the email address, the phone number, and the preferred language. So I'm going to show you an example of a customized referral system. So this is an example of a list of services that this person needed. So they identified that they had food access and security. So they have all of the food and nutrition information provided within this custom page. So then you can actually change the language of the form that you're going to send to the families, and you see the list of all the languages, which is pretty cool. You can also nudge the family. So then if you wanted to text the family through the program and not have to use your own personal phone, you can text or you can email that information, which is pretty cool. And another thing that I like about the program is you can skip this step altogether. You can just go into the service portion of it and then start perusing whatever programs you think your family needs that you're helping. And what's nice is they're providing COVID-19 updates. So you see here, they're saying services not available, their parenting skills classes, but they have other programs that they're still operating now, and it'll list that because through this program, they're constantly adding new users and they're adding updates on what services are not available. Now, you'll probably think to yourself, well, hey, Google can do that. Yeah, they can, but this is going to give you more real-time updates, and then it actually gives you a contact person. It also gives. So an awesome feature on NowPal is not only does it provide you with a customizable way to add services for families that you're working with, but you can also make a referral. So you see this cool little thing, you just click on the button and you're able to actually make a referral, and then you have an electronic tracking of where that family is at with receiving those services. So that is an awesome feature to have, is to have that two-way communication with organizations that are providing services. So you see that it was accepted and that contact was successful. And then, you know, when things are closed out or if they want to send you additional messages, that's also something that can be done. Another key note to include for the homeless liaison role is that I must gather as much information as possible with sensitivity and discretion to assist with any missing school enrollment paperwork. I do have a short video that we will watch on identification in just a few moments. I'm just going to finish up this slide. And also, within the role of the homeless liaison is I must verify the status of the homelessness. So there are times where families are referred to me, students are referred to me, and they are not deemed homeless and do not qualify for services. And you could refer back to that flow chart for further examples of what families or youth are not considered homeless under McKinney Vento. So once I deem that family homeless, I complete an intake to finalize the determination, which includes the parental rights notification within those forms. So something to consider: can the student go to the same place, fixed, every night, regular, to sleep in a safe and sufficient space, adequate? Will this be a permanent place of residency, or will they be staying there temporarily? So other examples of ineligibility: a family ends a lease and decides to stay with a relative to save money for a home, or foster care students. So under the revision of the Every Child Succeeds Act, that was another notation that foster care students no longer qualify under McKinney Vento.
Technically, identification happens on paper. When the box is checked on the enrollment form, a student has been legally identified as homeless. However, there's a lot of hard work leading up to that important moment. The law states that homeless children and youth are identified by school personnel through outreach and coordination activities with other entities and agencies. What does that mean? Identification relies on awareness and teamwork. When you train your coworkers about signs of homelessness, you're increasing the chances of identification. All of the work done to inform families of their educational rights, and all of the time spent in PDs training essential staff, this all leads to more students being identified and provided services. Start with required information. Did you know that your LEA is required to include a question about student living situations on enrollment forms? Part of a liaison's duties is to help their LEA review and revise policies, including enrollment and intake procedures. We'll dive into enrollment barriers and district policies in a later lesson, but for now, let's examine these suggestions from NCHE's toolkit. They suggest including housing questionnaires in the general enrollment packet that goes out to all students, as well as reviewing forms for other programs like Head Start, because this may lead to increased identification. Spend time building relationships with other agencies and raising awareness in your community to bolster support. Don't forget about the internet too. Get as much information out to as many people as possible. By including these strategies, you'll be increasing awareness and identification, and you'll get a jump on informing families of their rights. Of course, there is a short step between identification and enrollment, and that is confirming eligibility. One of the recent updates to the law now states that trained liaisons have the final say on eligibility. You can determine the homeless status of a student and/or their family and decide which services they receive without oversight. Confirming eligibility is a small step in the process, but each case is different and deserves consideration. We'll start by reviewing the legal definition of homelessness. The term homeless children and youths means individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The law goes on to give specifics about children and youths who are sharing the housing of other persons, who have a primary nighttime residence that is not designed for that, children and youths who are living in cars, parks, public spaces, and migratory children who also fit these above definitions. Sometimes it's obvious that a student is homeless just based on that definition. When it's not obvious, there are tools to help you make the determination. The most important thing to remember is respect. Some of your duties are clear-cut, but asking about someone's home life can be a delicate situation. The resources in this lesson will begin to prepare you for this task, and you'll be supported by research and best practices. It's also a good idea to reach out to peers, colleagues, and online communities. Learn from their experiences and keep the resources that work best for you. Later in this lesson, we'll read the specific criteria for homelessness laid out in the laws and guidance. But it all boils down to the student's experience. Can they go to sleep in the same place every night, and is it safe and livable?
So what are some common signs of homelessness? There are students that have increased number of absences and tardiness, multiple school transfers, unmet medical and dental needs, chronic hunger, poor hygiene, and I have again embedded the link of additional signs of homelessness for you to review at your own leisure. Now, what are some causes of homelessness? The primary cause is lack of or loss of affordable housing. So 40% of the homeless population is employed. Underemployed or unexpected job loss are all causes of homelessness. Other causes can be health problems, lack of insurance, sudden illness, parental mental health of drug or alcohol abuse, fleeing from domestic violence, natural disasters, and other disasters that may take place, such as fires. Also, LGBTQ issues within the home. So there's a lot of more youth that are running away from home. And there's about 110,000 homeless youth nationwide. Now, homelessness creates barriers. So students experiencing homelessness may not be able to meet school enrollment requirements. They move around a lot because of changes that are happening in trying to identify where they can sleep at night. Not having school supplies or a quiet place to study, not having access to reliable transportation, not having a parent or guardian to help, and those are our unaccompanied youth categories. And that's really where the role of the liaison really kicks in supporting to provide these kinds of services and setting up, well, pre-COVID, we were setting up transportation, making sure that if a student needed school supplies or materials, now we're giving out hotspots and Chromebooks. Those are things that are available to our homeless population. Other challenges associated with homelessness is poor hygiene, poor health, more likely to suffer from illnesses such as asthma, fevers, and stomach problems, poor nutrition, suffer from hunger more than twice as often as a non-homeless child. Along with that, a poor diet is likely as a healthier food cost. So I know we all have seen our children running out of the corner stores with those black bags, and I'm sure it's not first choice. It's more due to affordability. Fatigue, often lose sleep due to crowded living conditions and related stress. So I'm sure that when we were in school, you may have seen a student or two falling asleep during class. So that's a red flag right there. Stress or trauma, loss of the familiar housing, friends, pets, and constant worries regarding housing. Higher likelihood of witnessing violence, including domestic violence in the home. So these are all challenges associated with homelessness. Now, what does that do for the education? What are the effects? Students experiencing homelessness are more likely to be chronically absent from school, get lower grades, have special education needs, score poorly on assessment tests, and drop out of high school. So those are all the things that we're trying to avoid within the role of a homeless liaison. Now, statistically speaking, nationwide, this data was drawn back in 2017. There were, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, there's 1.3 million homeless children. In New Jersey, there's over 13,000. Regionally, there's a breakdown. This is the 17-18 data. And as you can see, Cape May was 292, Cumberland 665, Salem 347, Burlington 987, Mercer 267. So on the right-hand column is Trenton state reporting. And in 2018, 123 students were reported as homeless. In 2019, 240 students were reported homeless. In current year, 212 students were reported homeless back in October. I can tell you now that that number has increased, and we're looking at closer to that 245 mark at this point. Unaccompanied youth, going back to this population. Some youth become homeless with their families, but end up on their own due to lack of space and temporary accommodations, shelter policies that prohibit adolescent boys, the absence of a parent or guardian due to abandonment, death, incarceration, or a similar reason. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Taylor, and she's going to go a little bit deeper into the services.
So the shelter is located at 482 Center Street. We do have 12 beds in 6 rooms, and they are Jack and Jill style bathrooms. So for example, rooms number 1 and 2 share a bathroom, rooms number 3 and 4 share a bathroom, so forth and so on. The shelter is for all genders, and we do take this into consideration when assigning youth to their rooms. We ask the youth's preference as well as what we think would be best for their safety. We pride ourselves on trying to make the shelter as comfortable as possible. And at Anchor House, we have a saying where they don't live where we work where they live. And I think that says a lot about how we treat our youth and the environment we try to establish for them. With that being said, we do have a rec room that has a TV and a gaming console. I think we have Xbox right now, probably not the newest one, but it works. We do have a pool and foosball table. We have a full kitchen and pantry, a library and a study room, as well as a meditation room. So they're set up almost like little living rooms, and we do have separate rooms that don't have any kind of entertainment or meditation elements. It's literally just a room with some comfy furniture where the kids can either get away if they need some time to clear their heads, or where they can have treatment team meetings with either their CMO case managers, with a parent maybe during a family session, or with case managers. We do have a large clothing, linen, and hygiene closet. So we have newer, gently used clothes, hygiene products donated from other local agencies such as Clean, Comfortable, and Confident. I think they're a fairly new company, but they've recently donated some feminine hygiene packs and nice little backpacks. They've also donated a plethora of women's undergarments, because that's an item that we're very short on, but we do find that we need quite often. And should we not have something that the youth needs, whether it's a specific type of deodorant or certain hair products, we have funds allocated to purchase those items for the youth. And we typically try to take them with us just to ensure they feel like they have some sense of control, and we're making sure that they get exactly what they need, just as if they would if they were at home. As far as eligibility goes, so in addition to the age requirements that I mentioned in the previous slide, eligibility looks a little different now than it did before. In the past, we had a contract with DCP&P, which means they had funding that they used to pay for placements at shelters such as ours. And at Anchor House specifically, they paid for 5 beds a year at a time. However, with Governor Murphy's budget cuts for the new fiscal year, the Children's System of Care saw a very large budget cut, and to adjust to these changes, DCP&P retracted their contract with us altogether. Unfortunately, this means that we can no longer take youth with DCP&P involvement, and youth with CMO involvement are not eligible to stay with us either. However, they have never contracted with us, so that's not a result of the budget cuts. This is where I mentioned earlier that we have a chance to rebrand ourselves and attempt to take our services in a more clinical direction. But that will be a long road for us, and hopefully we can sustain our services in the meantime. And we do help hundreds of families agency-wide. At the shelter, obviously I mentioned our capacity is at 12, but with us being a temporary shelter and the youth staying for a maximum of 30 days, that number does roll over pretty quick, and we see a substantial number of youth in and out of the shelter each month. So as Denise mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are many causes of homelessness and even more barriers created by homelessness. So to drive the point home even further, I did want to share a few more statistics. And although it's difficult and very rare, understanding what leads to homelessness and some of the signs our youth may exhibit can be the difference between early intervention and helping after the fact. So it's not easy to prevent homelessness on a school level. However, if we notice some of the signs that Denise mentioned earlier and understand some of the other factors that contribute to youth homelessness, we can not only be prepared to help when that problem arises, but hopefully we can be an element to prevent it as well. So running away from home once decreases the likelihood that a youth will graduate from high school by 10%, and running away more than once increases the likelihood that the youth will not graduate by almost 20%. 34% of runaway youth, girls and boys, report being sexually abused before leaving home. This is something that we see all too common at the shelter, and I would imagine on the school end as well, that we definitely need to be aware of, simply because it's not always a factor that we think. When we hear homelessness, we think that they don't have a place to live, whereas sometimes it's not a safe place to live. Approximately 10% of shelter youth and 28% of street youth report having participated in survival sex. It is very much what it sounds like, that they need to give themselves up or give up sexual favors in order to maintain a safe place of living. And sometimes that does happen within their own home, not just out on the streets. So we need to be mindful of that and obviously redirect the youth in a better direction to make better choices, or so that they don't have to make those choices. Over 1/5 or 22% of runaway and homeless youth misuse prescription drugs within the past 30 days. This statistic specifically I know is about a year old, so within the past 30 days is relative. However, we do have to keep in mind that substance use is a factor in causing homelessness, as well as a barrier to removing the youth from an inconsistent living situation. Over 23,500 runaways were reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and 1 in 7 were likely victims of child sex trafficking. We may not think, I know a lot when we see stuff on the news or when we hear horrible stories from friends or relatives, you always sit there and think that's not going to happen to me. And the same with child sex trafficking or human trafficking in general. It's hard to imagine it happening right in your backyard, but Trenton is actually a very large hub for human and child trafficking, We see it a lot at the shelter, and it's something that everyone needs to become slightly more aware of. There's not a whole lot that we can necessarily do in the moment. Usually once a youth is caught up in a situation like that, it starts off very simple, whether it's from a friends group, someone saying, hey, come meet my friend. They've been buying me a lot of really cool stuff, and it's nice to spend time with them. And it usually snowballs from there. So a lot of the times it's not outright and obvious, but it is something that's happening in our own backyard, and it's only getting worse. So just being mindful of that as well as a cause to homelessness and a barrier that we might face when helping the youth and their families. And lastly, LGBTQ youth have 120% higher risk of experiencing homelessness. So we see that a parent may have gotten laid off, or like Denise had mentioned earlier, if there's a safety issue in the home, whether it being an issue with the water or just poor structure of the home, these are things that pop up in our head when we first hear homelessness. But understanding that the home could be fine, that one or both parents could be employed, they're financially sound, there's food on the table, but because of their child's sexual orientation, that youth may not have a safe place to live anymore. And it's sad, but an unfortunate reality that we just... So the last thing that I want to discuss, and possibly the most important, is managing the parent or guardian's emotions. A lot of this presentation has discussed how we help the youth experiencing homelessness, but obviously the youth isn't necessarily the only one experiencing the traumatic event that led to their lack of a fixed residence. In order to help our youth in the most effective manner, we need to work with the youth in all aspects, including their role as a part of a larger family system and those a part of their system. Our goal at Anchor House is ultimately reunification between the youth and their families. And in order to do so, our youth are typically not the only ones who need services. At the very least, we try to have parents engage in family sessions with the youth and a case manager at Anchor House to get a more complete view of the issue at hand. Obviously, if the youth is staying with us and receiving services from us, we want to take what they say very seriously. However, they are only one element of the story and one element of the current situation that they're in. So understanding the situation from multiple points of view will give us the best chance at helping them. Control. Helping parents understand that many things happen to us, sudden job loss, rent or bill increase, so forth and so on, are out of our control. And even the most prepared people run into obstacles along the way. It's important that we not dwell on the past, but focus how we can change for the future. So obviously, if a parent experienced a sudden job loss, that's a very much a past and a present issue. But instead of beating themselves up over why they may have lost the job or what they're currently going to do now, I personally, from a counseling perspective, like to focus on a future-centered approach, so what we can do going forward. And I do think that's something that anyone interacting with these parents can do. Also remind them that services like ours at Anchor House or other agencies wouldn't exist if this wasn't something that happened frequently. Resources. As I mentioned earlier, we're a connection to resources for not only the youth, but their families as well. The case management element of the services at Anchor House include helping parents receive the services they need, such as therapy, consistent access to food, job assistance, so forth and so on. So we may not provide the services in-house, but the case management element of our services goes a long way, and we can help parents or guardians in that aspect. Asking what they need. In the counseling profession, we are told through our training and throughout our supervision and our career to not use the word should with clients. And that's for two reasons. The first being that we don't want to rescue the client every time. If we do that, they won't have an opportunity to grow on their own. And we may be professionally trained, but we have no way of knowing what the client needs unless they tell us. So when working with parents or guardians, we have to apply the same thought process. We should ask them what they need and essentially teach them to advocate for themselves. A lot of times when a traumatic event happens or when a parent faces a defeat, so to speak, they almost throw in the towel and not look for someone to fix all their problems, but almost don't think they have a right to share their needs and what they feel like they need help with. It's a pride thing, but it's also just not really knowing how to make it about themselves when they have a youth to worry about as well. The parent or guardian is very much a primary focus of fixing whatever kind of situation they're currently in. And lastly, we want to encourage transparency. This is a fine line to walk, but I find that clear communication between parents and their children can go a long way. If, for instance, the parent or guardian needs to leave home more frequently to either search for a job or work overtime, communicating that to the child and letting them know that they're doing it to provide for the family and not because they enjoy spending time away from them is very important. Now, I say this as a thin line because sharing too much information with the children can also run the risk of overwhelming the youth. So it's important to guide the parents or guardians and help them maintain a healthy balance of that. But communication is key. I know as a youth growing up, if my parents had some kind of turmoil, it could have been an argument, it could have been a change in job, or it could have been, well, we're not going on this vacation this year because of X, Y, and Z. Knowing that made me resent them less for those drastic changes. It made me understand that they aren't doing it to spite me, or they aren't doing it to be selfish, and they're thinking about the family unit as a whole. So this isn't always going to be the case. It's not going to apply to every parent or guardian that we work with, but letting them know it's okay to share some of this information with their children is very vital, because children can sense things and sometimes they can't work through them and kind of dissect it in their own brain, but they notice when a change happens. And if they're not being cued into exactly what's going on, it could cause them to act out in other ways. So that's pretty much it on Anchor House and some of the services that we have to provide. My information will be listed at the end of this presentation. And obviously, if there's any questions or if any services of ours are needed, you can contact me directly or go through Denise. We're here for you and for the
Thank you so much, Taylor, for providing so much insight on unaccompanied youth, which is a population that needs a lot of additional support and services. So going into how do I refer a student if I think that they may be homeless or I find out that they're living in a hotel? You can identify many ways to reach out to me to give me that information. We have a school page on the school district website, and I've embedded all the links in which you can find all of the services, which you will have a copy of this presentation. So there is a homeless service page, there's a Parent Connect page, which is a page filled with community resources, and on the side panel is a redirect to the homeless service page. I have a service request form. So once you fill that out or a parent fills that out, I give about 48 hours for myself to reach out to the family and deem them homeless under McKinney Vento. I will then complete a intake form, and within this intake form, the family will read their parental rights. There also is a parental rights notification poster that's posted on our website, English and Spanish. Now, pre-COVID, I was sending out the posters to all the schools. Many schools still have those same posters up. It's still applicable. And also, if you are looking to do a referral to Anchor House, you can email Taylor, and her email address is listed below here. Now, student services, other services that can be provided to our homeless students. We have, each district has to allocate a homeless reserve fund through Title I, and those funds can be dedicated to any of these areas that you see listed below. I did put out an RFP for services in order for an agency to provide some of these services that you see listed. So I'm looking forward to solidifying that hopefully within the next few weeks, and have it board approved for December's meeting so that I can begin using an agency to provide some of these supplemental services that are needed for our families. So you see here, you can use funding for instructional and tutoring support, transportation, field trips, clothing, uniforms, safety equipment, anything that a student would need for the athletic program or music department, school supplies, counseling services, parental involvement, and other outreach work. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the pandemic relief notification and assistance that was provided by Governor Murphy. Now, this moratorium was put out back when the beginning part of the pandemic, when it started back in March. He put out basically a memo stating that no tenant could be evicted and no utility cutoffs. So I will say that most tenants meet these requirements. There are very, very few that will become evicted, but during this pandemic, it's very rare that you see anyone being evicted. That does not mean that a landlord will threaten, and I know that I've received a lot of calls from families, and I share this information with them so that they're aware of their rights. And there are a ton of rental and utility assistant programs out there. And again, I've embedded everything in this presentation, and you will be able to take a look at that in your own time. And also there's a COVID-19 relief childcare assistance application that is out. Now this is due to expire December 30th. So this is through an application process. It's similar to Child Care Connections. However, this is federally funded, and Child Care Connection is funded through the state. So these are some of the options that our family have for relief services. Now, here are some other school-related challenges that some of our students will face. And just kind of going back to the previous slide, that's where I would be able to tap into some of those services, such as transportation or accessing different activity programs and special clothing. So some other things that I wanted to have a conversation with all of you about is just lack of awareness and under-identification. There are so many more families out there that are in need of being identified and connected to services. So I'm hoping that through going through this training, you will have an aha moment and maybe be able to refer some families to me so that I can further connect them to some internal and external resources. And we want to make sure that we're just being consistent so that their school and educational stability remains constant. And that unfortunately is a challenge. So these are all the challenges that our homeless families face. Now I'm going to show you another video. Now this is a long-term case of homelessness, because oftentimes we say, some people may think, well, homelessness is a choice. And this is a shift of perception of why this family is choosing to be in a motel. So I hope you enjoy this video.
Zoe, your bus is here, baby. Where's your book bag? You want a zip? You do? Have a good day, okay? Okay. Your homework's in your book bag. Once I got married, I just thought that was the end all, and it was so wonderful and happy. And 20 years later, my whole world is wrecked. With a waiver from mom, we're going to transform the pumpkin into a coach, 4 mice into white horses and horses. were absolutely without a home, car, no transportation, nothing. So it was very fortunate that our family was able to step in, but they could only do so much. And we didn't want to be such a burden on them. And you can only have one mom in the kitchen. We came from a 3-bedroom home, having a backyard, front yard. And so when they would be able to go out in a fenced yard and play around, they're not able to do that anymore. They're not able to connect with other kids the way they were in their neighborhood. And so it becomes very frustrating for them. It's true in a sense that I'm here because I want to be, in the sense that it's better than going from house to house. So this is what I choose to do. Instead of, bugging other people to say, oh, well, can I stay with you? Or splitting up my kids and sending my kids somewhere and then I'm staying here. I was on the waiting list for a shelter for over a year. And the one shelter, I didn't want to be at that one because they would split us up. You know, my son, he was 16, but they were saying, because he would be with my oldest. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So here where we're at right now is straight out of my pocket. That was probably my biggest fear, because if I can't keep them in school where they are, and if I can't keep them together, one of your biggest fears is, them being taken away. Their world is already rocked with their situation personally, and being that we were going first from house to house, family to family. I'm just very grateful and very thankful that they're able to stay in their school in Bridgeton. That law has made it so wonderful, being able to stay in the same school even though we're not in the same city. Food is one of the most difficult, because with food, not being able to cook, you can't have a hot plate, you can't have a crock pot, all you have is the microwave. Food is very challenging. Most of my budget when I work 5 days a week, and half my budget is the rent, and then the other half is food, because every day you buy little things that you are able to keep snack-wise. But my children, they're used to eating. I was a wife and a mother that cooked every day. They had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So they're kind of used to that. And so that takes the budget. It's better to be here and we do the things that we need to do, because at least we have 2 beds. When we stayed in one room, all of us was in one room at my mother's house, and all of us was in one room at my sister's house. So my job is a good source of income. It helps us out a lot. It was like the ideal place. Literally, it saved my life. In a home, kids can either go to their room, go outside. Mom can go to the room, outside the kitchen, back porch, front porch, something. If we're frustrated, and we all get frustrated, we have to deal with our frustration. How to get out of it? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
All right, so here are a list of community resources. Homefront, I embedded all of the agency's websites on this slide. Arm in Arm, Rescue Mission, Catholic Charities, Anchor House, which is what Taylor reviewed. And emergency cases can also be referred to 211. So if for some reason you can't get a hold of me, or you can't get a hold of another agency, you can just contact 211, and that's a 24/7 hotline with specialists that can connect families to services. Now, this is another heartfelt story that I want to share with you, Rising Up Against All Odds. And this story hits close to home because this is a testimonial of one of our coworkers, someone that we work with. And this just goes to show that you just never know somebody's story or what they have been through. And there is power and impact of how we are able to influence people's decision making. And when we choose kindness and we choose to be empathetic and compassionate, we see how a story of a family that can rise up against all these challenges. And without further ado, I'm going to share her story.
Crystal's story is a success story. The story of a young mom protecting her children, overcoming crushing poverty.
I was lost. I was depressed. I was confused. I was giving up because I had children that I couldn't take care of. There was days I would have cereal with no milk. I used to have to use water. I used to have the canned goods, but no other food. I could tell by their face, like, we're missing something, Mom. I was in a very sad and dark place. And when I met Homefront, when I met Connie, that really changed. I felt like she heard me, she listened, and I wasn't just another statistic or another client at all. Because it was hard for me to open up to anybody. I let everything out, and it was just a breath of fresh air, and I just knew that there was somebody that was there for me and that cared. I wanted to be a social worker. And the only way I can do that was to go back to school. I got my bachelor's degree, and I wanted to prove to my kids that I can come from nothing and be something and have something. And I wanted to show them an example about how important education was. So today, I am taking classes to be a licensed social worker so that I can serve the families and students at Trenton Public School where I work. Because Homefront helped me, that helped me be able to help others. Home is supposed to be where the heart is. It was just that was my home front. That was my home.
It has been a pleasure presenting today to all of you. I hope you enjoyed all of the videos and all of the information that Taylor shared on Anchor House. This is my contact information. If you ever have any questions or you need to reach out to me in regards to a family, please do reach out. The quickest way for me to service families is by each of you completing that service request form. That's my first step. So then I'm able to gather all of the information that I need in order to best support that family. Now, of course, if it's an emergency, definitely shoot me a text or call me, and you can worry about filling out the form after we have a conversation. And below is Taylor's information again, if you have any other questions about Anchor House. And I also attached the McKinney Vento resource, training and material site from the National Center for Homeless Education. It's an awesome site if you want to receive additional training and other resources and material. So thank you and have a wonderful day.